It was supposed to be an ordinary day for Jake, a humble mechanic with a quiet garage tucked away at the edge of town. Known for his calm demeanor and sharp skills, Jake preferred to keep to himself. But everything changed when a rowdy group of bikers stormed in, demanding immediate repairs for their souped-up motorcycles. Frustrated by Jake's refusal to drop his other commitments, the group grew hostile, turning his peaceful shop into chaos. What they didn't know was that Jake wasn't just a mechanic. He was a retired SWAT officer with years of tactical training and a history of handling situations far more dangerous than this. As tools clattered to the ground and tensions rose, Jake's instincts kicked in. He calmly assessed the scene, but his piercing gaze hinted at a storm brewing within. Just how far would they push before realizing who they were dealing with? Jake stood still, his eyes scanning the group as they continued to wreak havoc in his garage. One of the bikers kicked over a toolbox, sending wrenches and sockets scattering across the floor. Another slammed a hand on the counter, barking demands. The smell of oil and burning anger filled the air. Jake didn't flinch, but inside, memories of tense standoffs and high-pressure moments flashed in his mind. He had seen far worse than a few unruly bikers, but he also knew how quickly things could spiral out of control. Years ago, Jake was the guy who walked into dangerous situations that others ran from. He had retired to escape that chaos, trading his bulletproof vest for a wrench, hoping for a quieter life. But old habits die hard, and his sharp instincts told him these men weren't just here to intimidate. They wanted to test his limits. Little did they know, Jake's patience wasn't endless. The leader of the bikers, a towering man with a jagged scar across his cheek, stepped forward, eyeing Jake like a predator sizing up prey. "You think you're too good for us, old man?" He growled, his voice echoing off the garage walls. Jake said nothing, wiping his hands on a rack as if they weren't trying to intimidate him. His calm demeanor only seemed to rile them up more. The leader smirked, mistaking Jake's silence for weakness. Meanwhile, Jake's mind was working like a well-oiled machine. He noted the way the bikers moved, sloppy but aggressive. Their motorcycles, parked haphazardly outside, told him they were in a hurry. Something wasn't right. Jake glanced at the corner of the garage where his security cameras quietly recorded everything. Outside, a teenager who often hung around the shop watched nervously from behind a dumpster. He had seen the bikers arrive and knew they were bad news. With trembling hands, he pulled out his phone and dialed a number. Little did anyone know, help might already be on the way. The tension in the garage grew thicker as the bikers continued to push their luck. One of them yanked a crowbar from the workbench, spinning it in his hand with a smug grin. "What's the matter, old man? Scared?" the leader taunted, stepping closer to Jake. Still calm, Jake leaned against the counter, his eyes cold and calculating. He wasn't scared, he was waiting. Outside, the teenager's call had reached the local police, but the response time was uncertain. Jake knew he couldn't count on anyone else to de-escalate the situation. He glanced at the clock on the wall, silently calculating how much time he had. The bikers didn't notice. They were too busy ransacking his tools and laughing among themselves. But Jake's sharp gaze caught every detail, from the way the leader carried himself to the glances exchanged between a couple of the others. Suddenly, one of the bikers slammed a heavy wrench onto Jake's pristine workbench, sending a loud crash through the garage. "You better do as we say, or this place won't have a single thing left standing," he snarled. Jake finally spoke, his voice low and steady, cutting through the noise like a blade. "You don't want to find out what happens if you cross that line." For a moment, there was silence, and even the bikers seemed to hesitate. But the leader laughed, shaking his head. Big talk for someone outnumbered. He didn't realize Jake wasn't bluffing. Every second brought the situation closer to the breaking point, and Jake's patience was running out. Just as the leader leaned closer, sneering at Jake's warning, the distant sound of sirens began to echo faintly through the air. The bikers froze for a split second, their bravado cracking ever so slightly. "Looks like someone's a snitch," one of them muttered, glaring toward the garage entrance. But Jake knew better. Those sirens weren't just lucky timing. The teenager outside had come through, and the cavalry was on its way. Still, Jake wasn't ready to relax. The bikers weren't the type to run at the first sign of trouble. If anything, they looked more desperate. The leader's smirk twisted into a scowl. "You called them, didn't you?" he snapped, stepping closer to Jake. Jake didn't flinch, but his stance shifted slightly. A subtle change that only someone trained to read body language might notice. "Nobody called anyone," he replied evenly, keeping his gaze locked on the leader. Suddenly, the biker with a crowbar moved toward Jake's prized motorcycle, parked near the corner of the garage. He raised the tool, threatening to smash the tank. "If we're going down, you're losing something too," he growled. Jake's eyes flicked toward the bike for a brief moment, but when he looked back, his calm mask had slipped just enough to reveal a flicker of intensity. The sirens were growing louder, but time was running out. The situation teetered on the edge of chaos, and Jake knew he had to act before the bikers did something they couldn't take back. The biker with the crowbar raised his arm higher, ready to bring it crashing down onto Jake's motorcycle. Before he could swing, Jake moved, fast, precise, and deliberate. In one fluid motion, he grabbed a wrench from the workbench and stepped forward, his voice cutting through the chaos like a command. "Drop it. Now." The sharpness in Jake's tone stopped the biker mid-swing. For the first time, the group seemed to sense they had underestimated him. The leader, still trying to maintain control, barked, "Don't listen to him. He's bluffing." But Jake wasn't. His stance, the way he held himself, radiated a confidence that came from years of training. Before the bikers could react further, the sirens reached the garage, and flashing red and blue lights filled the windows. The teenager had done more than call the police. He'd flagged down an officer nearby, and reinforcements had arrived faster than anyone expected. The leader turned toward the door, his bravado melting into panic. Jake used the moment to disarm the biker with a crowbar, twisting it from his grip with practiced precision. The others hesitated, unsure whether to fight or flee. Just as it seemed the chaos was ending, Jake revealed his final card. From his pocket, he pulled out a badge, not a mechanic's ID, but his old SWAT credentials. "I tried to warn you," he said calmly, holding it up for them to see. The bikers froze, the weight of their mistake finally sinking in as officers stormed the garage. As the bikers were cuffed and led away, Jake caught the teenager's eye through the window and gave him a small nod of thanks. The shop was a mess, but Jake knew one thing for certain. This wasn't the first time he'd handled a high-stakes standoff, and it wouldn't be the last time his past came in handy. As the last of the bikers were loaded into patrol cars, Jake stood in the doorway of his garage, surveying the damage. Tools were scattered, a few shelves knocked over, and his workbench bore the scars of the chaos. Still, the important things were intact: his bike, his shop, and most importantly, his sense of peace. The teenager cautiously stepped out from behind the dumpster, his face a mix of worry and relief. Jake gave him a small smile. "Good thinking, kid," he said. "That call probably saved us both a lot of trouble." The boy nodded, clearly relieved to see Jake unharmed. By the time the officers drove away, Jake had already started cleaning up. His movements were steady, his mind calm. He didn't regret stepping in. This wasn't the life he wanted anymore. But sometimes the past had a way of showing up when you least expected it. For now, though, the garage was quiet again, just the way he liked it.